The Valorian Empire was one of the most powerful forces in the known galaxy. It stretched across thousands of star systems and controlled billions of lives. At the heart of this great empire sat Queen Saritha on her crystal throne. She was tall and beautiful in the way her people were beautiful. Her skin had a slight shimmer to it, like glass catching light. Her eyes were deep purple and ancient with wisdom. The Valorians were a proud species. They could sense the emotions of others, reading feelings like humans read books. They lived for centuries and considered themselves among the most advanced beings in existence. When Earth was discovered and absorbed into the Empire, Saritha saw humans as little more than interesting pets. They lived such short lives. They had no telepathy, no natural weapons, no special abilities. They were soft and fragile creatures from a small blue world at the edge of nowhere. The Galactic Council wanted peace between the new human territories and the Valorian Empire. They proposed a political marriage. Queen Saritha would take a human husband as a symbol of unity. Saritha agreed because it cost her nothing. A human husband would have no real power. He would be a decoration, a gesture, to keep the humans calm while they adjusted to imperial rule. Her advisors were not happy about this arrangement. They saw it as an insult to her noble bloodline. But Saritha silenced them with a look. She knew how to play political games better than anyone. The human they sent was named Marcus Cole. He was a diplomat in his early 40s with gray starting to show at his temples. He was not tall by Valorian standards. He was not impressive to look at. He had a calm face and gentle brown eyes and a smile that came easily. When he arrived at the palace, the courtiers whispered behind their hands. Some of them laughed openly. This was the best humanity could offer. This plain, ordinary man. Marcus walked through the crystal halls of the palace with his head held high, but not in arrogance. He nodded politely to everyone he passed. He complimented the architecture. He asked servants their names and thanked them for small kindnesses. The Valorian nobles watched him with confusion. He did not seem to know that he should be ashamed or afraid. Queen Saritha met him in her throne room. She sat above him on her elevated seat, looking down at this human who would become her husband in name. She reached out with her mind to sense his emotions, expecting to find fear or nervousness, or perhaps desperate ambition. Instead, she found something that surprised her. There was a calmness in Marcus Cole that went deeper than anything she had felt before. It was like looking into a still lake that had no visible bottom. There was warmth there too, and patience, and something else she could not quite identify. "You do not seem afraid," Saritha said. Her voice echoed in the great hall. Marcus smiled up at her. "Should I be, Your Majesty? Most beings are afraid when they stand before me." "I find fear wastes energy," Marcus replied. "I would rather spend that energy getting to know you." The court laughed at his boldness. Saritha did not laugh. She studied this strange human with new interest. He was either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. The wedding preparations began immediately. It would be a grand ceremony attended by representatives from 100 worlds. Marcus spent the days before the wedding walking through the palace and the city beyond. He talked to everyone he met. He learned about Valorian customs and history. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, he asked thoughtful questions. The other alien ambassadors at court offered him their sympathies. The Thermary ambassador told him that he was essentially a sacrifice. The Genix representative suggested he enjoy whatever pleasures he could before the queen grew bored of him. Marcus thanked them all for their concern and continued being friendly. Lord Vanthas, the leader of the noble houses, took a particular dislike to Marcus. He was old and proud and believed humans were barely more evolved than animals. He went out of his way to humiliate Marcus at every opportunity. He would speak in complex Valorian, and then mock Marcus for not understanding. He would arrange for human foods to be removed from banquets. He would seat Marcus at the far end of tables, away from anyone important. Through all of this, Marcus remained calm and kind. He never lost his temper. He never complained. When Lord Vanthas insulted him directly at a dinner, Marcus simply nodded and said that he had much to learn about Valorian ways. This response seemed to frustrate Lord Vanthas more than any argument would have Queen. Saritha watched these interactions from a distance. She could not understand this human. When she sensed his emotions during these insults, she expected to find hidden anger or resentment. Instead, she found only that same deep calm and something that might have been amusement. It was as if Marcus knew something that everyone else did not. The night before the wedding, Saritha summoned Marcus to her private chambers. She wanted to understand him before she bound herself to him, even in this symbolic way. Marcus arrived promptly and bowed with genuine respect. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" Saritha asked him directly. "You must know what you are to these people. A joke, a symbol, nothing more." Marcus considered her question carefully before answering. "Your Majesty, I agreed because my people need this alliance to work. If my being here helps keep peace between our worlds, then every insult and every laugh is worth it. And that is all? Duty? No," Marcus admitted. "I also hoped that I might actually be of some use to you. A different perspective can be valuable, and I have found that kindness tends to open more doors than force." Saritha studied him for a long moment. "You are a strange creature, Marcus Cole." "I have been told that before," he agreed with a small smile. The wedding day arrived with great ceremony. Thousands gathered to watch the Queen of the Valorian Empire marry a human. The Crystal Palace was decorated with flowers from a dozen worlds. Music played from instruments that humans had no names for. Marcus stood at the altar in clothing designed to bridge both cultures. He looked small next to Saritha in her magnificent gown, but he did not look weak. There was a quiet dignity in how he held himself. The ceremony was long and filled with ancient Valorian traditions. Marcus had learned each one and performed his part without error. When the time came for the final blessing, the high priest raised his hands to call upon the ancient powers. That was when the assassin struck. A figure burst from the crowd. With an energy weapon raised, the blast was aimed directly at Queen Saritha's heart. It happened so fast that her guards had no time to react. The weapon fired with a sound like thunder, but Marcus moved faster than anyone expected. He threw himself in front of Saritha, placing his body between her and the deadly blast. The energy struck him full in the chest and threw him backward. He crashed to the ground and did not move. The guards seized the assassin. The crowd erupted in chaos. But Saritha stood frozen, staring at the human who had just sacrificed himself for her. She had given him nothing but cold tolerance. She had allowed her people to mock and humiliate him, and in return he had taken a blast that should have ended her life. She rushed to his side and knelt beside him. His clothing was burned and smoking. His body was terribly wounded. But somehow, impossibly, he was still breathing. His eyes opened and found hers. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. Saritha felt something crack inside her chest. This human, this supposedly weak and ordinary creature, had nearly died for her, and his first thought upon waking was to ask if she was safe. "Hey," she demanded. "Why would you do that for me?" Marcus managed a weak smile. "You are my wife now," he said simply. "That means something where I come from." Then his eyes closed, and he fell unconscious. The medical teams rushed forward to save him, and Queen Saritha of the Valorian Empire found herself praying to gods she barely believed in for the life of a human she had only just begun to understand. The alien queen thought she wed an ordinary human until he showed his true strength. Part 2. The shield nobody expected. Marcus Cole lay in the medical wing of the palace for 3 days. The doctors were amazed that he had survived it all. The energy blast that struck him would have killed most Valorians instantly. It should have burned through his fragile human body like fire through paper. But somehow, Marcus lived. His heart kept beating. His lungs kept breathing. His body fought to heal itself with a stubbornness that the Valorian doctors had never seen before. Queen Saritha visited him every day. She told herself it was her duty as his wife, even if the marriage was only political. She told herself she was curious about this strange human who had risked everything for her. But deep inside, she knew there was something more. She felt connected to him in a way she could not explain. On the 4th day, Marcus opened his eyes. Saritha was sitting beside his bed, reading reports on a crystal tablet. She looked up when she heard him stir. "You should be dead," she said bluntly. Marcus managed a weak smile. Humans are stubborn that way. Why did you do it? Suritha asked. She had asked this question while he was unconscious, but she needed to hear his answer when he was awake. You gain nothing by saving me. I have given you nothing but coldness since you arrived. Marcus was quiet for a moment, gathering his strength. Your Majesty, where I come from, marriage is not just politics. It is a promise. When I agreed to be your husband, I made a commitment. Your people may see it as a joke, but I do not. Suritha did not know how to respond to this. In her world, political marriages were exactly that. Political. There was no expectation of loyalty or sacrifice. Partners in such arrangements used each other for advantage and nothing more. You are a fool, she said finally. Perhaps Marcus agreed. But I am alive, and you are safe. That seems like a fair trade to me. News of Marcus's sacrifice spread quickly through the Empire. The story was told in markets and meeting halls across 1,000 worlds. A human had thrown himself in front of an energy blast to save the Valorian queen. It was almost impossible to believe. Humans were supposed to be weak and selfish creatures, caring only for themselves. Yet this one had proven himself willing to die for someone who had shown him no kindness. The investigation into the assassination revealed a conspiracy among the noble houses. Lord Vanthas and several other lords had planned to kill the queen and blame it on human terrorists. They would then use the anger to break the alliance with Earth and seize power for themselves. The evidence was clear and damning. The traditional Valorian punishment for treason was immediate execution. Lord Vanthas and the other conspirators were brought before the queen in chains, expecting to die. The court gathered to watch justice be served. But before Suritha could pronounce sentence, Marcus spoke up. He had insisted on attending despite his injuries. He stood with bandages still visible beneath his clothing, leaning slightly on a staff for support. Your Majesty, he said, may I have permission to speak with the prisoners? The court fell silent. Lord Vanthas looked at Marcus with pure hatred. This was the human he had mocked and insulted for weeks. Surely Marcus wanted revenge. Suritha was curious to see what her husband would do. You may proceed, she said. What happened next shocked everyone watching. Marcus did not threaten the conspirators. He did not gloat or demand their suffering. Instead, he approached Lord Vanthas with something like compassion in his eyes. You hate humans, Marcus said. It was not a question. Tell me why. Lord Vanthas stared at him with confusion. Why should I explain myself to a creature like you? Because I am asking, Marcus replied, and because no one has ever asked before. Something in his calm sincerity broke through Lord Vanthas's defenses. The old lord began to speak. He talked about his fears for the Empire. He talked about watching other civilizations fall after contact with aggressive species. He talked about his worry that humans would spread through the galaxy like a disease. Taking everything for themselves, Marcus listened without interrupting. When Lord Vanthas finished, Marcus nodded slowly. Your fears are understandable, he said. Humans have not always been good to each other, let alone to others. We have a violent history, but we have also learned from that history. We are trying to be better. He turned to the other conspirators, asking each of them similar questions. He listened to their answers with patience and respect. By the end, he had learned that the true mastermind was not Lord Vanthas at all, but a younger lord named Kirill, who had manipulated everyone else's fears for his own ambition. More surprisingly, two of the lesser conspirators had broken down and agreed to testify against the others. They had been so moved by Marcus's willingness to understand them that they felt genuine remorse for the first time. Suritha asked Marcus privately afterward, how did you make them confess without threats or torture? People want to be understood, Marcus explained. When you listen to them, truly listen, they often tell you everything you need to know. And sometimes, being heard makes them reconsider their choices. Suritha found herself thinking about humans in a new way. That night, she accessed the Imperial archives and began studying human history. What she found kept her awake until dawn. She read about ice ages that nearly wiped humanity from existence. She read about plagues that killed half their population. She read about world wars with weapons terrible enough to destroy their entire planet. Again and again, humans had faced extinction. And again they had survived. But it was not just their survival that fascinated her. It was how they survived. They helped each other. They sacrificed for strangers. They rebuilt from ashes with stubborn determination. There was a strength in humans that had nothing to do with physical power or advanced technology. It was something deeper, something that Siritha had never encountered in all her centuries of life. As Marcus recovered over the following weeks, his relationship with the Queen began to change. She invited him to sit beside her during council meetings. She asked for his opinion on matters of state. The courtiers noticed and whispered among themselves. Was the Queen actually beginning to respect her human husband? Marcus, for his part, continued to be himself. He was kind to servants and nobles alike. He remembered names and small details about everyone he met. He never raised his voice or lost his temper, even when insulted. There was a warmth to him that began to affect everyone around him. Then the crisis came. Reports arrived that the Kreth Dominion had launched a massive raid on a Valorian colony world called Van Treseven. The Kreth were a warrior species, brutal and ruthless. They had been testing Valorian borders for years, but this attack was different. This was a full invasion. The War Council gathered in the throne room. Generals and admirals argued about fleet movements and strategic responses. The numbers were grim. The Kreth had caught them off guard. 30,000 Valorian civilians were trapped on Van Treseven with no way to escape. The military consensus was clear. The civilians were lost. A rescue mission would cost too many ships and soldiers. The strategic thing to do was to reinforce other borders and let Van Treseven fall. Marcus listened to all of this in silence. When the generals finished their reports, he raised his hand to speak. Siritha nodded for him to continue. How many civilians did you say were trapped? Marcus asked. 30,000, the admiral replied. But the cost of rescue would be too high. We cannot risk the fleet for one colony. Marcus stood up slowly. Those are 30,000 lives. 30,000 families. 30,000 people who trusted the Empire to protect them. War requires difficult choices, the general said coldly. I understand, Marcus replied. That is why I am volunteering to go myself. Not to fight, but to negotiate their release. The council stared at him like he had lost his mind. Negotiate with the Kreth? The Kreth did not negotiate. They conquered, and they killed. Everyone knew that. But Siritha looked at her husband and remembered what he had done with the conspirators. She remembered how he had turned enemies into allies with nothing but patience and understanding. Perhaps the Kreth were different. Perhaps they would simply kill him. But perhaps, just perhaps, this strange human could do the impossible again. Very well, she said. You have my permission. Marcus bowed to her. As he turned to leave the council chamber, Siritha felt something she had not expected. She felt afraid. Not for her empire or her throne, but for this human who had somehow become important to her. She called out. He stopped and looked back at her. Come back alive, she said. It was as close as she could come to saying what she really felt. Marcus smiled at her, that same calm and gentle smile. I'll do my best, Your Majesty. And he walked out to attempt the impossible. The alien queen thought she wed an ordinary human until he showed his true strength. Part 3. The weight of human endurance, though. Journey to Van Treseven would take 3 weeks through hostile territory. Marcus assembled a small team of volunteers. Most of the Valorian soldiers thought the mission was suicide, but a few stepped forward. They had seen what Marcus did at the trial. They were curious about this human who seemed to fear nothing. Lieutenant Kira was the first to volunteer. She was young and fierce, with the crystalline skin of her people shimmering like diamonds when she moved. She did not like humans, but she respected courage. Commander Thane joined next. He was older and more cautious, a veteran of many campaigns. He thought Marcus was foolish. But he also thought someone needed to keep him alive. The small ship left Valorian space in secret. They traveled through back routes and hidden passages, avoiding Kreth patrol ships. Marcus spent the journey learning everything he could about the Kreth. He studied their history, their culture, their values. He talked with Kira and Thane for hours about Valorian military tactics and Kreth weaknesses. You ask many questions, Kira observed one night. Do all humans do this? The ones who survive do, Marcus replied. Knowledge is power, even when you have no weapons. The trip was hard. The small ship had limited supplies and uncomfortable sleeping quarters. The route through hostile space required constant alertness. They barely slept, surviving on short naps and strong drinks. Kira and Thane watched Marcus carefully, expecting him to collapse from exhaustion. Humans were supposed to be fragile creatures who needed regular rest, but Marcus kept going. When he was tired, he simply worked through the tiredness. When he was hungry, he ignored it and focused on the mission. When the ship hit an asteroid field and everyone was thrown around the cabin, Marcus got up with blood running down his face and immediately checked on the others before tending to his own wounds. How do you do this? Thane asked him after the third sleepless night. Your species requires more rest than ours. You should be unable to function. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead and managed a tired smile. Humans have a saying, we will rest when the job is done. Our bodies tell us to stop, but our minds can push further. Much further. That sounds like torture, Kira said. Sometimes it is, Marcus admitted. But we have learned that limits are often lies we tell ourselves. When the situation demands it, we find strength we did not know we had. They reached the edge of Antris 7 after 18 days. The planet was surrounded by Kreth warships. Getting through seemed impossible. But Marcus had been studying the Kreth patrol patterns. He had noticed a small gap that appeared every 6 hours during shift changes. It lasted only 12 minutes, but it was enough. They made their run through the gap with seconds to spare. Their ship was nearly detected twice, but luck and skill kept them hidden. They landed in a destroyed city on the far side of the planet from the main Kreth forces. The scene on the ground was terrible. The Kreth had been brutal in their conquest. Buildings were burned and bodies lay in the streets. The surviving Valorians had been gathered in camps, treated like animals. Marcus walked through the destruction with a heavy heart. But his determination only grew stronger. They spent 5 days working their way across the planet toward the main Kreth command center. They moved at night and hid during the day. Marcus was injured twice during this time. Once he was cut by debris while climbing through a collapsed building. Once he was burned when they had to escape through a fire. Both times, he bandaged his wounds and kept moving. Kira began to understand something about humans that she had never considered before. They were not strong despite being fragile. They were strong because they had learned to endure. Every generation of humans had faced hardship and survived. That survival was written into their very nature, passed down through thousands of years of struggle. My people live for centuries, she told Marcus one night, as they rested in a burned-out house. We have forgotten what it means to fight for every day of life. But your people live such short lives, and you fight for every moment. Perhaps that is what makes those moments precious, Marcus replied. When something can be lost, it becomes worth protecting.
Oh.
They finally reached the Kreth command center on the 6th day. It was a massive structure built from dark metal, surrounded by guards and weapons. Marcus walked toward the front entrance alone. Kira and Thane wanted to go with him, but he refused. If this goes wrong, someone needs to get back to the Queen and report what happened, he said. That is your job. My job is to try the impossible. The Kreth guards seized him immediately. They dragged him before their commander, a massive warrior named Vorn, who had conquered a dozen worlds. Vorn looked at Marcus with contempt. He had never seen a human before, but he had heard they were weak and worthless. You come to negotiate? Vorn laughed. The Kreth do not negotiate with insects. Then you will not mind listening to an insect speak, Marcus replied calmly. I bring information that you will want to hear. Vorn was amused enough to let him continue. Marcus began to speak. He did not beg for mercy or threaten revenge. Instead, he presented facts. During his journey across the planet, Marcus had gathered intelligence. He had learned that Vorn had been told by his superiors to conquer Van Trisavon quickly and quietly. But the resistance had been stronger than expected. The campaign was taking too long. Vorn's rivals back home were already using his delays to undermine his position. How do you know this? Vorn demanded. Because I listened, Marcus said. Your soldiers talk when they think no one important is around. And I am very good at seeming unimportant. He had more information too? Battle plans, supply routes, communication codes, all gathered through patient observation and careful questions. It was enough to destroy Vorn's career if it reached the wrong ears. I could kill you and take this information, Vorn growled. You could try, Marcus agreed. But you do not know what I have already sent back to my people or what will be released if I die. And even if you kill me, my people will remember. Humans always remember. Vorn stared at this small, wounded creature who spoke to him without fear. There was something in Marcus's eyes that made the great warrior hesitate. It was not the look of someone bluffing. It was the look of someone who had accepted death and moved past it. What do you want? Vorn asked finally. The civilians, Marcus said. All 30,000 of them. Released unharmed to Valorian ships waiting at the edge of the system. In exchange, I will give you my silence and a future favor. A favor from a human? Vorn scoffed. A favor from someone who has proven he can get information that no one else can, Marcus replied. Someday you may need such a person. Think of this as an investment. The negotiation lasted 3 hours. In the end, Vorn agreed. He did not agree because he was afraid of Marcus. He agreed because Marcus had made it logical to agree. The human had turned every argument, found every weakness, and built a case that could not be defeated. The civilians were released 3 days later. Ships arrived to carry them home. As the last transport lifted off, Marcus finally allowed himself to collapse. His body had been running on nothing but willpower for weeks. Now that the job was done, everything caught up with him at once. Kira carried him back to their ship. He was burning with fever, his wounds infected, his body pushed far beyond its limits. She looked at this broken human and felt something she never expected to feel for a lesser species. She felt admiration. When they returned to the Valorian homeworld, they were greeted as heroes, but Marcus saw none of it. He was unconscious, barely clinging to life. Queen Saritha rushed to his side and refused to leave. She held his hand through the long nights as doctors fought to save him. Why does he keep doing this? She whispered. Why does he keep sacrificing himself? But she already knew the answer. Marcus had told her from the beginning. Marriage meant something to him. Commitment meant something. He was not a man who made promises lightly, and he was not a man who abandoned people he cared about, as she sat beside him in that quiet room. Watching his chest rise and fall with each labored breath, Queen Saritha of the Valorian Empire realized something that changed everything. She was not watching him out of duty anymore. She was not even watching him out of curiosity. She was watching him because somewhere along the way, she had begun to care about him. Not as a symbol or a political tool, but as a person, as a partner, perhaps even as someone she could love. When his hand found hers in his fevered sleep, she did not pull away. She held on tight and waited for him to wake up. The alien queen thought she wed an ordinary human until he showed his true strength. Part 4, the true strength. Marcus Cole woke up in a soft bed surrounded by flowers from a dozen worlds. His body ached in places he did not know existed, but he was alive. That was more than he had expected when he walked into Commander Vorn's headquarters. Queen Saritha was sitting beside him. Her eyes were tired, as if she had not slept in days. When she saw him awake, something flickered across her face. Relief, warmth, things she had trained herself never to show. You kept your promise, she said quietly. I try to keep all my promises, Marcus replied. His voice was weak and rough. The recovery took 2 months. During this time, something changed between Marcus and Saritha. She visited him every day, not as a duty, but because she wanted to. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood, about the weight of ruling an empire, about the loneliness of power. He told her about Earth, about human history, about the small things that made life worth living. The palace noticed the change. Servants who had once ignored Marcus now treated him with genuine respect. Nobles who had mocked him now sought his advice. The story of what he had done on Vantra 7 had spread throughout the empire. This human had walked alone into enemy territory and freed 30,000 prisoners through nothing but courage and cleverness. But Marcus did not care about fame or respect. He cared about doing good work. When he was strong enough to walk again, he returned to his old habits. He wandered the palace and the city beyond, talking to everyone he met. He learned about their problems and tried to help where he could. A servant worried about her sick child. Marcus found a doctor willing to help. A young lord struggling with debts. Marcus introduced him to a merchant who needed an investor. Saritha watched all of this with growing wonder. "You help people with no expectation of reward," she observed. "Even people who once treated you badly." "Everyone deserves kindness," Marcus said simply. "And you never know when a small kindness will become something larger." He was right. 3 months after his return, the Kreth Dominion launched a full invasion of Valorian space. This was not a raid or a test. This was war on a scale the Empire had not seen in centuries. Kreth fleets attacked on multiple fronts. Colony after colony fell to their advance. The Valorian military, spread thin across a vast territory, struggled to respond. The War Council met in emergency session. The news was grim. For every battle won, 2 more fronts opened. The Kreth seemed endless, their hunger for conquest insatiable. Even Saritha's legendary composure began to crack under the pressure. "We cannot win this war alone," Admiral Vex reported. "Our fleets are too scattered. Our resources are stretched too thin." "Then we make peace," Lord Theron suggested. "Give them territory in exchange for ending the conflict." "The Kreth do not want territory," General Koth growled. "They want conquest. They want submission. If we show weakness, they will take everything," the council argued in circles, growing more desperate with each passing hour. Finally, Marcus raised his hand to speak. The room fell silent. They had learned to listen when the human talked. "You have been fighting alone," Marcus said. "But humans never fight alone if we can help it. We build alliances. We find common ground with those who share our interests." "There is no one to ally with," Admiral Vex replied. "The other species in this region either fear us or hate us, because you have never given them reason to feel otherwise," Marcus said gently. "But I have been talking to ambassadors and traders for months. The Thermari are worried about Kreth expansion threatening their trade routes. The Genix engineers need rare materials that the Kreth control. The Pale Collective lost 3 of their worlds to Kreth aggression decades ago. They have not forgotten." He stood up and looked around the room. "Each of these species has been approached by the Valorians before and rejected. They do not trust you, but they might trust something new. A coalition where everyone has an equal voice. An alliance built on mutual benefit rather than imperial demand." "This would take months to negotiate," Saritha said. "We do not have months. It would take months for a traditional diplomatic approach," Marcus agreed. "But I do not use traditional approaches." Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus became the most traveled person in the galaxy. He shuttled from world to world in small ships, meeting with leaders and common people alike. He listened to grievances. He acknowledged past wrongs. He found common ground where none seemed to exist. The Thermari were the first to agree. Their trade minister had been one of the ambassadors who pitied Marcus during his wedding. Now she sat across from him with new respect in her eyes. "You remember what I said to you back then?" she said. "I told you that you were a sacrifice." "I remember," Marcus replied. "I was wrong. You are not a sacrifice. You are something I have never seen before." She signed the alliance agreement. The Genix came next. Their chief engineer was fascinated by human problem-solving. Marcus spent 3 days in their factories, discussing engineering challenges and offering suggestions from human industrial history. By the end, they were eager to join a coalition that included such creative minds. The Pale Collective was the hardest. They had suffered greatly under Kreth invasion and trusted no one. But Marcus did not push or demand. He simply told them stories of human history. He told them about nations that had been conquered and destroyed only to rise again generations later. He told them that survival was always possible for those who refused to give up. "Your people truly believe this?" the Pale Elder asked. "We have proven it 100 times," Marcus said. "We will help you prove it again." Word spread across the galaxy. A human was building an alliance that had never existed before. Species that had been rivals for centuries were sitting at the same table. Old grudges were being set aside in the face of a common enemy. The Kreth Dominion, watching from their conquered territories, began to grow nervous. When Marcus returned to the Valorian homeworld, he brought with him representatives from 12 species. The coalition fleet they promised was larger than anything the Kreth had expected to face. Admirals from different worlds stood together in the war room, planning a counterattack. Saritha watched her husband walk among these leaders, helping them find common ground, solving disputes before they could grow. He had no military rank, no political title. He was just a human who refused to accept that problems were unsolvable. "How did you do this?" she asked him privately that night. "How did you convince so many species to trust each other?" "I reminded them that they were not alone," Marcus replied. "And I showed them that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can speak the most important truths." But their moment of hope was interrupted by terrible news. Intelligence reports revealed that the Kreth had discovered the coalition's existence, and they had responded by sending assassination teams to kill every coalition leader before the alliance could take action. The attacks would come simultaneously across a dozen worlds. There was no way to protect everyone at once. The coalition would fall apart before it could fight its first battle. Marcus sat quietly for a long moment after hearing this news. Then he stood up and faced the assembled leaders. "The assassins will be looking for their targets," he said. "High-value individuals in protected locations. But what if there was a more tempting target? Someone who could draw all the assassins to a single location." "What are you suggesting?" the Thermary minister asked. "I am suggesting that I make myself the bait. I am the symbol of this coalition. If the Kreth believe they can destroy everything by killing me, they will focus their efforts here. And while they are hunting me, you will be safe to launch the counterattack." The room erupted in protest. Saritha's face went pale. "No," she said firmly. "I forbid it. I will not lose you to another suicidal mission." Marcus walked to her and took her hands in his. For the first time, he did not call her Your Majesty. "Saritha," he said softly, "this is what I am good at. Finding solutions that no one else can see. If I can keep this alliance together by putting myself in danger, then that is exactly what I should do." "And what about me?" Saritha asked. Her voice cracked in a way it never had before. "What about what you mean to me?" Marcus smiled at her, that same gentle smile that had confused her from the very beginning. "You are what I am fighting for," he said. "You and everyone else who deserves a chance at peace. Let me do this. Let me be the shield one more time." Saritha wanted to refuse. She wanted to lock him away where he would be safe. But she had learned something about humans over these long months. They needed to be useful. They needed to fight for what they believed in. Taking that away from Marcus would be taking away the very thing that made him who he was. "Come back to me," she whispered.
Always.
Marcus promised. The next morning, the coalition fleet began its journey toward Kreth space, and Marcus Cole stayed behind, preparing to face an army of assassins with nothing but his wit, his will, and the connections he had built one kindness at a time. The alien queen thought she wed an ordinary human until he showed his true strength. Part 5. What humans are made of. The battle for the Valorian Empire began on 2 fronts. In the darkness of space, the coalition fleet clashed with the Kreth Armada in a battle that would decide the fate of countless worlds. On the Palace world, Marcus Cole faced the most dangerous warriors the Kreth Dominion had ever produced. The assassins came at night. There were 12 of them, each one a master of death, trained from birth to kill. They moved through the shadows like ghosts, silent and deadly. Their target was the human who had humiliated their empire. It's the creature who had built an alliance that threatened Kreth dominance. But Marcus was not hiding in his chambers waiting to die. He had spent the previous days preparing. Every servant he had helped, every guard he had treated with kindness, every noble whose problems he had solved became part of his defense. They were his eyes and ears throughout the palace, The first assassin was spotted by a kitchen servant who Marcus had helped find medicine for her daughter. She sent word through channels Marcus had established, and he was waiting when the assassin emerged from a hidden passage. Not with weapons, but with a trap. The floor gave way beneath the assassin's feet, dropping him into a holding cell far below. The second assassin was detected by a young guard named Tarek. Marcus had noticed that Tarek was being bullied by his commanding officer and had quietly arranged for a transfer. Now Tarek repaid that kindness by tracking the assassin's movements and guiding Marcus through safe routes in the palace. One by one, the assassins found that their prey was not as helpless as they expected. Marcus used every trick humanity had learned through thousands of years of survival. He set traps in corridors. He created false trails that led nowhere. He used the palace's own systems against his hunters, locking doors and opening others to herd them where he wanted. But he could not catch them all. Some of the assassins were too skilled, too experienced. As the night wore on, the hunt became more dangerous. Marcus was wounded in 3 separate encounters. A blade sliced his arm. An energy blast grazed his side. A fall down a flight of stairs left him limping badly. Still, he refused to stop. Every moment, he kept the assassins focused on him. It was another moment the Coalition fleet had to win their battle in space, far above the palace world. That battle was reaching its climax. Queen Saritha stood on the bridge of her flagship, commanding the Coalition forces against the Kreth Armada. She was a warrior queen now, her crystalline skin glowing with fierce determination. The Kreth had expected easy victory. They'd ruled through fear for generations, crushing all opposition. But they had never faced an enemy like this. The Coalition fought together in ways the Kreth could not understand. Thermary ships covered Jinnix cruisers. Pale collective vessels protected Valorian supply lines. Each species brought unique strengths. Together, they were far more than the sum of their parts. Saritha's flagship took heavy damage in the middle of the battle. Her officers counseled retreat to a safe distance. But she remembered what Marcus had taught her about human resilience. She remembered his words about showing the galaxy what they were made of. "We hold the line," she commanded. "All ships maintain position. We do not retreat. We do not surrender." The Coalition forces heard their queen's voice and found new courage. They pressed their attack against the Kreth lines. Slowly, impossibly, the tide of battle began to turn. Back on the palace world, Marcus was running out of time and tricks. 3 assassins remained, and they had cornered him in the throne room. The leader was a massive warrior named Crix, the deadliest killer in the Kreth Dominion. Marcus stood in the center of the room, bleeding from a dozen wounds, barely able to stay on his feet. He faced Crix with that same calm expression he had worn since the day he arrived. "You should be begging for mercy," Crix growled. "You are broken and weak. You have no weapons, no armor, no hope." "I have something better," Marcus replied. "I have a reason to keep fighting." Crix laughed and lunged forward with his blade. Marcus dodged, but barely. He was too slow, too injured. The next strike would kill him. But then the doors of the throne room burst open. A dozen palace guards rushed in, led by former conspirators who had once plotted against the queen, lords who Marcus had spared at his trial, servants who he had helped, soldiers who he had treated with respect. "We stand with the human," Lord Vanthus declared, his blade raised against the assassins. This was the same lord who had mocked and insulted Marcus for weeks. But Marcus had shown him mercy when he deserved death, and that mercy had planted seeds that now bore fruit. The fight was brief and brutal. The remaining assassins were skilled, but they were outnumbered by people fighting for something more than duty. When it was over, Crix lay dying on the floor of the throne room. "How?" The assassin gasped, staring at Marcus. "How did you turn enemies into allies? How do you keep fighting when you should have died 100 times?" Marcus knelt beside him, ignoring his own terrible wounds. Even now, facing someone who had tried to kill him, he showed compassion. "Humans do not know how to quit," he said simply. "We never learned how." In space, the Kreth fleet shattered. The Coalition forces pursued the survivors, liberating world after world that had fallen to Kreth aggression. It was the greatest victory in a generation, won by species that had never trusted each other before. Queen Saritha returned to her home world as soon as the battle was secure. She found Marcus in the medical wing again, surrounded by doctors who were amazed he was still alive. His body was broken in more ways than they could count, but his eyes were open, and when he saw her, he smiled. He asked. Saritha took his hand and held it tight. "We won," she said, "because of you. All of it because of you." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed. The coalition became permanent, a union of species committed to mutual defense and cooperation. The Kreth Dominion, broken and humiliated, retreated to their core worlds and posed no further threat. The Galactic Council formally recognized humanity as a major species, not because of military strength or technology, but because of something far more valuable. They had shown the galaxy what true strength looked like. A ceremony was held in the great throne room of the Valorian Empire. Representatives from every species in the coalition attended. Queen Saritha stood before them all, with Marcus beside her. He was still healing, still bearing the scars of his sacrifice, but he stood tall and proud. "When I agreed to marry a human," Saritha addressed the assembly, "I thought I was accepting a symbol, a token from a lesser world. I expected nothing from him but quiet obedience." She paused and looked at Marcus with eyes that glowed with emotion. "Instead, I married the strongest being I have ever known. Not because he cannot be hurt, but because he cannot be stopped. Not because he is without fear, but because he faces fear and keeps moving forward." She took Marcus's hand and raised it high. "This is what humanity offers the galaxy. Not weapons or technology, but spirit. The spirit to endure any hardship. The courage to sacrifice for others. The wisdom to build bridges instead of walls." The assembly rose in applause that shook the crystal walls of the throne room. Marcus stood quietly, accepting the honor not for himself, but for all of humanity. Later, when they were alone in their private chambers, Saritha asked him a question that had been on her mind for a long time. "When you first came here, you were mocked and ignored. Everyone treated you like you were worthless. Did you ever doubt yourself? Did you ever think about giving up?" Marcus considered her question carefully. "Every day," he admitted, "but giving up was never an option. My people have a saying, fall down 7 times, stand up 8. The falling does not matter, only the standing back up." Saritha leaned her head against his shoulder. "I am glad you stood back up," she said quietly. "I am glad you came into my life." "So am I," Marcus replied. He wrapped his arm around her. This human who had started as a political convenience and ended as the love of her long life. The story of Marcus. Cole spread throughout the galaxy. It was told in schools and meeting halls, passed down from generation to generation. The human who had faced an empire with nothing but kindness and determination. The man who had united enemies and turned rivals into friends. The ordinary person who had proven that true strength had nothing to do with physical power. On Earth, humans heard the stories and felt a swell of pride. One of their own had shown the galaxy what humanity could be at its best. Not conquerors or destroyers, but builders, bridge makers, people who saw strangers as potential friends rather than enemies. And in the Crystal Palace, at the heart of the Valorian Empire, Marcus Cole continued to be himself. He walked the halls with a smile and a kind word for everyone. He helped where he could and listened when listening was needed. He remained humble despite his fame, always reminding people that he was just one human doing his best. When his old age finally came, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried both human and Valorian blood, Marcus Cole looked back on his life with satisfaction. He had made a difference. He had shown the galaxy what humans were made of, and in the end, that was all he had ever wanted to do.